now I can very easily and very quickly upload as many files as I want. Hi everyone, Greg here. So about a year ago, I did a video about how to do web programming in C. This is hands down the most watched video on my channel. So thanks very much to everyone who watched it. What I covered in the last video, I talked about outputting HTTP headers. I talked about the query string, the post method, and a little bit about cookies. So I suggest you watch that video first if those concepts are not entirely familiar to you. I am going to do a quick recap about the post and get method that you would be using in a form, and then we're going to move on to explore file upload. Okay, so here now I am logged in into my web server, and in this particular directory, and it is part of the CGI bin directory, I have this file env.c, and this is about the environment variable. So I'm going to show you the code of this. This is very simple. All I'm doing is I'm taking the environment variable, I print the HTTP header, otherwise I can't actually display this in a browser. I go through every single one of those environment variables and I print it, right? And then I do the HTML line break and I go through the environment variables, and that's all I do, right? And the reason I do this is just to show you what a program can actually see once you have, and of course I use Apache 2 as the web server. So what a program actually sees when Apache 2 kind of calls upon your program to actually start producing a web page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile this, and now I'm going to call that program in browser. Right, and now you can see all the environment variables. So you have those key value pairs. Basically, you see basically what is a label, an equal sign, and then the actual data, right? And like the host, the user agent of the client, and so on and so forth, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the form. So I have on my desktop here, I have this file. So let me look at this in an editor first. So what you can see here, it's a very simple bare bone HTML file, but what you can see here, this is the URL of the program that I've just run. Method I've used get, and then there is just one field where I can input data, and then just a submit button. So what if I open this file in a browser, and I'm just gonna type in whatever. I submit, and now you see the same program has run. A difference you're gonna notice is here the request method, it's gonna be called get, and then here we have a query string, and says data1, so the name of the field, and then whatever I typed in. So with a form, there's basically two ways of submitting data. There is the post and there's the get method. So the difference, and what you can see here in the URL, whatever follows that question mark, this is the query string. So this is one way of passing on data. What I'm gonna do here now is I'm gonna refresh this. So this is now gonna be with the post. I'm gonna type in something again, submit, and now what you see here is the request method is post, the query string is empty, right? Now, what is the difference between the get and the post method? With the get, the data is sent in the URL itself. With the post method, the data is sent inside the HTTP header. So now how do I access that data? Because you can tell it's nowhere here. Well, it's actually inside a standard input of that program. So I don't actually have it here because I didn't read standard input when I was running this program. But that is basically what I'm gonna have to do. And when I upload a file, then it's also the post method that is going to be used. Alright, so now I have made changes again to this form. So I put in another input tag of type file, and actually I have to give this a name, and I can just call this the file. Okay, I chose the post method still, and I put in the end type. I'm not sure what that stands for. I'm assuming it stands for encoding type. So with this, I'm going to change this, right? I'm going to change this to upload, let's say. Right, so this is what you see in the browser when I actually load this modified form.html. I made it a bit bigger so you can see it better. And now I get this browse button, and I can click on that, and I can actually start selecting a file. I could select this file, and then I could press submit, and it will actually send the file to the server. Now, of course, on the server side, there's nothing to actually receive and process it, but it would actually send the file now. Okay, so I'm back here on my server. I've now written the first version of upload.c. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So simply printing the HTTP header, and then I get the environment variable. So what I was doing in the previous example, I was here using a double pointer env to list easily all of the environment variables. This is simply a different way of doing the same thing. So I do get env, and then I specify which environment variable I want, so content type. So this is basically one of those in the list here. So content type, and then I'm simply gonna output this so you can see what it is. And then content length is another one I want to simply display so you can see. And now I'm also going to read from stdn. So I'm doing this here, if read from the buffer. So first I need to do a malloc, make sure that I actually have some space. How much space do I need to allocate? Well, I take the environment variable content length, and I convert it to an integer here. So I have it in len. I add 1. I always like to make sure I have a no character at the end. And so basically that's how much memory I allocate. And then what I do at the end here is I output the contents of the buffer, and I make sure that it's in bold so that when we see it in the web page, we can clearly tell what is what. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to compile that, and now here I'm gonna, oh yes, I should show you that file, that way you'll recognize it. So if I go to my desktop, I put the file here. So this is the contents of the file. You see it's a very short file, and this is what I'm going to upload to my server. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put some dummy value here. This is data1, if you remember, that was that other input field. I'm going to submit. Okay, and now what you see is we have this bit in bold. We have the content type, which is multi-part form data. So this was the ink type on the form, if you remember, but now we have this other part here that says boundary. Because we have multiple bits of data, you need to be able to tell where one bit of data ends and the other one begins. So this is the boundary that we have that is given to us. The content length is 678 bytes. And then here we see that first boundary to begin with. We're given some information, and including the file name, right? So the file that we just uploaded, the content type, so we have just plain text. And now this is my file. This is the content of the file, and the new line characters, they don't display the same because this is displayed within a web page, but all of that data was actually uploaded. So I've actually sent the file to my server now. That's the end of the file, so now I get another boundary. And then now I have data 1 with the content, and the content is dummy. And then now another boundary to let me know this is the end of all of the data, and then here that presumably kind of notifies that there's nothing else coming, right? So as a next step, what I need to do is write some code that will simply parse through all that, right? Be able to take out the file name and then save the content under that file name. Okay, so that is what I'm going to show you next. Okay, so now I've written the second version of upload. I'm going to show you real quick how I did that. And I want to first focus your attention on what I did here as a matter of output. So I have now this array fields, and I just loop through it, and I print out the first element in the field, and then I print out the following one, and this one I put in bold. So I print them out 2 by 2 like this, and these are basically the key value pairs within the array. So and I've already compiled that, so basically I did it very simply. I'll do it again there now just to show you. Like this, that's compiled again. When we look again at the form, so there was this input file, and I give it a name, the file, and then an ordinary text box, and it's called data1. So that's the form. So now when we look here, the first time, that's what you saw a while ago. So I need to parse this. So when I do the same thing now with the new upload, similarly, I get those key value pairs, data1, dummy. And then for the file, it's a bit more complicated because it doesn't fit neatly in those key value pairs. If I look at the header here, I have name, the file, and then there's file name, litany.txt, and then here I have the actual content of the file. So I really have 3 things: the name of the field in the form, I have the file name, and then the content. So the file here, I have this repeated. The reason I did that is for the sake of consistency. So I keep this system of key value pairs, and I have an even number of elements throughout the array, which makes it easier when you loop through it. So you can choose a different design if you want to, but I think even though it's redundant to have this twice, I think there's a lot to be said for consistency and just making things more easy. So now that I've done this, what follows is really easy. I have to create a new file, use this as the file name, and then simply do an fwrite and have this as the content. Alright, so now how did I do the parsing of the HTTP header? So I'm going to show you here now. Basically, what I do is I get that environment variable content type. Then this stands for buffer begins. This is one of the functions I have in my personal library. I see if the buffer begins with this bit. So that is basically we get from the content type. It is this. If we don't see that, if this condition fails, that means we're not actually uploading a file. And if that happens, we go all the way down to this else, and we output no uploads detected, and we return 0. So what if that actually worked? Then a lot of what we do next is the same as the previous upload.c. So we get content length, we allocate a buffer, and we just read from sttin. Now, what we then do is we go a first time through that header. So buffer find string. We go through the buffer and we look for the boundary. So it will return the index of where it finds that boundary. Then while next not equal to -1, we keep going through the buffer. We're looking for, basically we're counting how many buffers. So num plus equals 1, we're counting how many times, how many buffers, how many boundaries. We're looking to see how many boundaries we are going to find. Now, basically in this specific case, we know how many boundaries, but I'm trying to make sure that this code is going to work in as many different circumstances as possible. If I decide to change the form, I still want that code to work. So basically I count the number of boundaries. I have num boundaries. I multiply by 4 because if I have a file, I'm going to have one element, a second element, a third element, and then the content, the fourth element. So I'm going to have 4, and you never know if I ever decide to upload multiple files at a time or so. I only need 2 if I have an ordinary text box, but then I have a few too many. That doesn't hurt anything. And then I add 1 because I want to have a no character at the end. The fields, I allocate the memory. I initialize to 0. Buffer, I go back to the beginning of the buffer. So original buffer, that was basically the starting point of the buffer. And now I find a boundary again, the first boundary again in the buffer. While next is not equal to -1. So now I'm just going through all the boundaries and putting the relevant strings in this array fields. The buffer, I move that pointer up by next. -4. Now, just before a boundary, I expect to find a carriage return and a new line twice. So I will go carriage return, new line, carriage return, new line. So this 4 is to account for that. I set it to null. Then I hop over that boundary. And then I see if it starts with this, right? Content disposition form data. So that is what I find here. Content disposition form data. That comes just before it says name the file. And it comes here too. Content disposition form data just before it says name data1. So I see if I find that. Then I go to that part of the buffer. I'm looking for that character, that double quote. So that's going to bring me here, right? So I do n+1. N is the index where I find that double quote. So n+1. So then that will get me to just inside that double quote, right? On that T. And fields index will be equal to buffer. So the first element in the field now is going to point to that text, the file, right? I increase the index. I'm looking for the closing quote. I jump over that. I put a no character there. So basically the file and then a no character. So that's the end of the first element, right? So I set it to null. Now, and then we have here if buffer equals that semicolon. So now here either of two things happen, right? Either what follows is a semicolon, or what follows is not a semicolon. If it's not a semicolon, I have just an ordinary field within a form, the text within a text box or something like that, right? If what follows is a semicolon, at that point there's going to be another field, file name, and more double quotes and so on. So if I have a semicolon, I'm looking for a double quote again, right? I'm going to have another, I fill in the next element in fields, right? So I'm just going to go through this. So I just have to do more work here. Whereas if I don't have a semicolon, I can just move up the buffer. Right, so I just do buffer +4. So if I don't have a semicolon here, I do expect, again, character return new line, character return new line. So this is why I'm doing this +4. And then I have the next element. That next element being dummy, right? So that's what I encounter here at the end. I will have data 1, and then the next element will point to dummy, right? And then I increase the index again. I'm looking again for the next boundary, and I just go through that loop where I keep looking for the next boundary. That's basically how I fill in fields, right? So it's a bit complicated, but I think you get the basic idea. Okay, so we had the first version of upload, the second version, and now I'm going to show you the third and final version of upload. And you can tell it's very different. I put some HTML in there for a start to kind of clean things up a bit. We have more fields now in the form. So we have the file, this file field where we can just select a file to be uploaded. The target directory, so where we can tell it where exactly on the server to save the file. And then we have a password. And this is something I haven't talked about until now, but obviously you're not going to have a page like that available to the public where people can just upload files to your server. You're going to put some kind of restriction on that. So passwords. I'm going to talk more about passwords in a second, because to do this right, there's quite a bit involved there. With the password, and then just a button to submit. So if we go to my server, I'm going to show you now what's in that upload directory. And you can see there's nothing there. So I'm going to fill in the password. Password is 1965 June. And I don't want it to save that. And then what it tells me is successful upload. And you see that it reloads the form so that now I can just select a different file. If I look at my server, you see that that file is there now. If I look at the contents, you see that indeed there is something in the file. So that did upload successfully. And now I can very easily and very quickly upload as many files as I want. So like, just for example, password is now a hidden field in the form, so I don't have to retype it all the time. And so now I have those two, right? Okay, so if I look at what's actually in the directory where we have the source code, you can see there's a lot more going on here now. So we have the program upload, we have the different versions of upload, so upload 3, we have web.h. And because generating the passwords, and not so much generating the passwords, but storing the passwords requires hashing, we have those two files here. And I have a whole video about hashing and how to deal with passwords. So if you're not familiar with hashing, just go watch that video. I'm not gonna explain hashing here now. Just know that it's a thing, and that what the source code in those files is just, it's just the code that enables the secure hashing algorithm 256, right? And if that's not familiar, again, go watch that video and it will explain all of those things. So how did I compile this code? And all of this will be in the GitLab, so you'll be able to see all of the code. What I did is I did this. Now the -c means to only compile and not create an executable. This will create this .o file, right? And then what I do is I do upload.c and this, and now because this is using this hashing algorithm, I need to include that object file. And now it uploads, it compiles and it creates this. Okay, I'm going to show you the code of upload.c. I have it here. This is a different editor, but it's the exact same code. So the main function, you can tell I've just more HTML there. I still have to output the HTTP header. This is basically the same thing that you've already seen. This will create the fields array with all the data inside of it. If fields, so obviously if you load that web page for the first time, this if is going to fail and it's not going to do any of this. So field 7 is where the password would be. So we're just making sure it's not too long. We get the contents from the password file, which will be a hashed password. We copy the password that the user has given us in that form. We copy that into this character array. Then we concatenate to that password. We concatenate the salt. This is the salt. Again, I'm not going to explain what salt is. If that's not familiar, then you just look at the video I've referred to. Then it actually performs the hash. Right? And all of those functions I put into web.h to make it simple, so that it actually has everything that it needs in order to support this upload web page. Then it just compares. So basically this password will be hashed and the output of the hash will be put into this other character array called hash. So it just compares hash with the password that's in the password file. So you have real here, so that's the actual password in the password file. It compares, and if they're not identical, then it just prints out oopsie and it exits. If they are the same, then we have this character array path. Fields 5, that is the there's the target directory, right? So we copy fields file into path. We make sure that there is a /. So basically there's a / here. If the user were to type in a path without the /, then we add it ourselves just to make sure it's there. So it will concatenate this / if necessary. And if that field is not present, then it's just going to default to taking the default upload path. And then you concatenate with the file name. And then you open a file for writing. And you write the contents of that file. You close it, and then you output successful upload. And if something went wrong, if you were not able to open that file for writing, then you just output an error message not saving. Okay, then you know the upload was not actually successful. And then here, print HTML code. This is the form. So once you have successful upload, that form is printed out again so that you can upload the next file. So print HTML code, that's what that does. It just prints out that form again. Right? And here, for instance, it will check whether you have already typed in the password. If you haven't, it's just gonna have a field here and ask for the password. If you have, then it's gonna have this hidden field, and the password will already be in the form. And it's not gonna ask you again. And there's simply the submit button. I could actually do this. So now instead of having submit query, it will just say upload file. Right, so now what I've done is I've uploaded upload.c again, and I've recompiled it. So now when I refresh it, it says upload file here. The other thing I need to point out is that you now also have this generate as file, and then of course you have this file here which has the password in it. This is a hashed password. And then you have that file here containing the password. So generate passfile.c. This is actually a very short file. You see here what it has is this is the actual password. So when you download the code and when you use this, you have to change that to whatever password you want to use. And in fact, that salt, you should change that as well to some, like to anything at all, some nonsense. The only thing that's important is that in upload free, you then have to use the same salt. Those have to be identical, and the process, right? Because basically what you do is you do a buff compare, and you make sure that the password from the file and the password you've just after hashing, those two have to be identical. So you have to go through the exact same steps each time, right? So, oh yeah, I was showing you here. So you change the salt, then you do the actual hash, and then you save that that hashed password, you save it into that file. Then, you know, you do the write and you close the file. Okay, so that will generate this file here with the hashed password in it, so that you can actually then start using your web page, your upload page. Okay, so that's basically how you upload files using only C, writing your own code on your own web server. So I think that's pretty neat. And again, the code will be in the GitLab, so you can play around with that. You can do whatever you want. So I hope this was useful and educational, maybe a little entertaining too. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.